Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to talk to you about the books that I read in March 2023. In case you didn't know this already, if you're newer here on BookTube, we have a lot of annual events going on during the month of March, and one of them that I really cherish is March Mystery Madness, during which we celebrate all things murder mysteries. It's an annual tradition that I always like to join in on because there's just something about the late winter that makes me crave murder mysteries, and I really committed this year. My entire life essentially became a murder mystery. I watched the entirety of the new TV series called Poker Face. I played countless games of Cluedo. And of course, I read a ton of murder mystery novels. The first one I read was a new release called The Golden Spoon by Jessa Maxwell. And this takes place during the filming of a Great British Bake Off type show. And it's set on this gorgeous old property owned by the host of the show. And this original host was the only host until very recently because producers have brought in a second host in order to boost ratings. And the original host is secretly not too happy about that addition, but that's not the only secret that is destined to be revealed throughout the events of this novel. It seems like everyone on this set, from the crew to the contestants, has something to hide. The concept behind this one, the entire premise of this book, is so solid. And I think the author really nailed developing the atmosphere on the set. As I was reading this, it really felt like I was watching the show being filmed. Although I should mention for my fellow Great British Bake Off fans out there, the show that's depicted in this novel is a lot more cutthroat and competitive than the Great British Bake Off is. This one feels more like an American cooking show. If you've ever seen American cooking shows, you'll probably understand what I mean by that. But other than those elements, I really don't feel that this worked as a novel. I didn't like certain choices the author made. I didn't like the way the plot unraveled. Obviously, I can't say much more than that without venturing into spoiler territory. But my disappointment is somewhat eased by the fact that Hulu is already planning to develop a miniseries adaptation of this novel. And I think because this is a novel that's literally about the filming of a television show, I think it has the potential to work much better as a television show itself. Call me blasphemous if you want, but I do think it's possible for an adaptation of a book to be better than the book itself. I've seen it happen, and I really hope it happens here. But I also read my very first Agatha Christie novel during the month of March, and I decided to pick up one that was fairly controversial around the time that she first published it. That book is called The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. This is about two deaths that happen in fairly quick succession in a small town. A woman takes her own life, and not long after, the man that she was supposed to marry ends up getting murdered. Everyone in the town suspects that the murdered man's adopted son was the one who committed the murder, but Poirot, who is convinced to take the case, thinks there's a little bit more to it than that, so he starts to look into it with the help of this novel's narrator, who is a doctor in this town. As I was reading this novel, I kept being surprised by just how funny it is. The narrator and his relationship with his gossipy sister, and then all of Poirot's eccentricities, it was all highly entertaining and made for just truly delightful reading. But knowing what I know about this novel and its history, which I read all about in a nonfiction book that I picked up late last year called The Science of Murder by Carla Valentine, that's a book all about the forensics to be found inside of Agatha Christie's novels, and more generally, it talks about her development as a murder mystery writer. It talked a lot about this book, its history, why it caused a bunch of controversy, and knowing what I know about it, I was unfortunately able to guess the conclusion of this novel. So that took away the surprise, which is a little bit unfortunate, but that's not to say I didn't have fun reading this, because I absolutely did. I can see what everyone loves about her now, and I'm really excited to go and read some more of her novels. So if you have any particular favorites that you think I should prioritize, let me know in the comments, and I'll add them to my list. I also picked up the second book in a cozy mystery series that I started quite some time ago. It's a series all about a family of lockpicks who are convinced to put the brakes on their life of crime in order to help the British government during World War II. The second book in that series that I read is called The Key to Deceit by Ashley Weaver. And the mystery in this one is the death of a young woman who was very likely feeding secrets to the Nazis. But that mystery creates many questions to be answered. Who was this woman? Who was she working for? Why was she killed? Our main characters will have to answer all of those questions before they can prevent more intel from getting into the hands of the Germans. Ashley Weaver isn't just the author of this series, which is called the Electra MacDonald series, but she's the author of another series, the Amory Ames novels, which just so happen to be my all-time favorite cozy mysteries. And I've wondered once or twice over the years, do I have a soft spot for Ashley Weaver's novels? Do I believe that they're just that good because that's the first cozy mystery series I ever fell in love with? Or are they really, really good? And now, after having started another series from her and having fallen for it almost as hard as I fell for her first series of novels, I'm now convinced that no, she's just that good of an author. This new series is great, and this is a great installment in that series. There's a non-annoying love triangle, lots of twists and turns, there are great side characters, there's great historical information. The Blitz actually begins in this one, and I thought the way the author described it was so well done. You know, if someone like me, who normally does not like historical fiction of any kind set during World War II, can read this and feel gripped by the time period, that this author has some serious talent. And I do believe that she does. This was just so enjoyable. I'm really glad, actually, that I drug my feet, that I took some time getting to this second book in the series, because I just recently finished this one, and the third one is due to come out next month. And I may just go ahead and pick that one up as soon as it's released, because I'm feeling that pull. I'm feeling the momentum. These are highly bingeable books, so I'm really wanting to do that. If you want to join in on the fun, if you want to pick up the first book in this series, it's called A Peculiar Combination. The next mystery novel I read during March was another historical one, but this one is by BookTube's very own Katie from Books and Things. Very recently, she released her debut novel, which is called The Secrets of Heartwood Hall. And this is all about a widow who goes to work as a governess in this big old house that no one in the town where this house is located wants anything to do with, because the house is rumored to be haunted. And not all that dissimilar to The Golden Spoon, which I discussed earlier, just about everyone in this novel has something to hide. There are, of course, big-time Bronte influences scattered all throughout this novel, but there's also something a little bit Downton Abbey about it, with the upstairs-downstairs dynamics and all the scheming that happens. Now, I have to acknowledge that Katie and I have been acquaintances here on BookTube for years, so any review coming from me is going to have a touch of bias to it. That is just unavoidable, because I know Katie and I really admire Katie. But I can tell you, I had a lot of fun reading her novel. There were moments when it felt like I was reading a debut novel, but then there were other times when I was so swept away by this story that not only did I forget that I know the person who wrote this, but also I forgot that it was her first novel. So I definitely think it's worth a read, especially if you like the types of books that Katie hypes up on her channel, those delicious Victorian classics. If you like those, you will probably like her novel. But then the final two mystery books that I read for March Mystery Madness were 2 out of a total 3 in a 1980s mystery series by K.K. Beck called the Iris Cooper series. The first one was called Death in a Deck Chair. The main character is a young American woman named Iris Cooper, and in this first book, she's on a boat with her aunt on her way back to the States from Europe, and someone on board gets murdered, and the mystery of that murder gets very political. Then in the second book in the series, which is called Murder in a Mummy Case, Iris goes to visit the family home of her boyfriend, who is a very kooky aspiring archaeologist, so much so that he has an actual mummy in his family home. And suffice it to say that a body is eventually discovered in that mummy case, which inspires a whole lot of mummy/mommy puns and plays on words, which is just about the only part of this that I found enjoyable. I didn't care much for either of these, to be completely honest with you, and I thought during the month of March that I was going to have the time and energy to push through and then read that third book so that I could unhaul all 3 of them with zero remorse. But as we move forward in the month, I decided decided that I changed my mind. I just didn't want to go on to read the third book if I didn't feel confident I was actually going to enjoy it. So I am just going to go ahead and get rid of all three. This was probably the least successful part of my March Mystery Madness adventure. But then there were a few more non-mystery fiction books that I finished up during the month of March. One of those was Jeanette Walls' new work of historical fiction, which is called Hang the Moon. I firmly believe that this is a novel that belongs at the center of a Venn diagram. The two circles of that Venn diagram would be the Tudors and Prohibition-era Virginia. This book would live right at the center of those two things, and it stars a Spitfire female main character. I enjoyed this one so much more than I thought I was going to, which is why I felt inspired to make an entire review video for this one, which I will link for you in the description box below and up in the cards in case you missed it. I also finally finished The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Philyaw. This is a short story collection that was on my February TBR. I started this back in February, finished it up during March. And this one has been so hyped up over the years that I really had sky-high expectations for this one. And when I first started reading it, I really enjoyed the early stories, so it didn't disappoint. But then as I kept moving through the collection, there were some stories I enjoyed less, and that affected my momentum. So I put this down and finished it up later. And I think that little delay in me reading this went on to affect how I see this collection overall, how I felt about it overall. Now, this very well may be a me problem, because I feel like I'm slowly coming to the conclusion that I'm just not really a short story reader. I feel like by the time I'm invested in a story, it's over, and then I have to start all over again. So yeah, I enjoyed this, but I wasn't as blown away by this as I was prepared to be because of all that hype. But then the final fiction book I finished during the month of March was a complete reversal of the way I felt about The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. At first, I thought it was just fine, but by the end, I was hooked. And that novel is The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is an adventure novel, a historical adventure novel set during England's War of the Roses. And in it, we get to see a young man get caught up in the plans of this underground group. They are hoping to seek revenge on this young man's guardian for all the terrible things that he has done. I thought it was just fine at first. I was along for the ride, but then by the end, when the future King Richard III enters the chat, and we get to see the main character realize the error of his ways, I was totally invested. I couldn't put the book down. And that's the reason why in my What's the Story Wishbone video, in which I look at the episode inspired by The Black Arrow, I had some things to say about the choices that they made. So if you want to hear more about this book, the story of it, and how the writers of Wishbone adapted it for the children's TV show, I will link that video for you in the description box below and up in the cards. I had one review appear in the Christian Science Monitor during the month of March. I reviewed a memoir of an African wildlife veterinarian called Walking with Gorillas. And in this book, the author discusses how she essentially created her dream job after veterinary school. She wanted to look out for the wildlife in Uganda's national parks, and no one had done that before her. So she created that job, and then later on, she branched out to look out for gorillas specifically in very creative, very effective ways. Her story is incredible. This memoir is so rewarding to read. If you want to hear more of my thoughts, I will link my review for you in the description box below. Then there were a few more nonfiction books that I finished during March, including Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy by Karen Abbott. This was one of the 23 nonfiction books I wanted to make a priority of reading this year. This one tells the stories of 4 women who played influential, if understated, roles in the American Civil War. 2 of them sided with the Yankees, 2 of them with the Confederates. The majority of these women did work behind the scenes. They gathered intel, they traded secrets, they tried to covertly free prisoners, but one of them actually went so far as to disguise herself as a man, and she joined in on the fighting. These are incredible stories that I somehow had never heard before. Although I will admit that I was not equally invested in all 4 of the stories, I found it very challenging to become as invested in the stories of the women supporting the Confederate side of things, because I know precisely what they were supporting. But one of those 2 women especially really got on my nerves. Belle Boyd was such a narcissist. a narcissist of yore. I could not stand her. But even in her sections, this author had me invested in the story. It is not an easy feat to bounce between the stories of these four women and keep you invested and help you remember what had happened in the previous section. So we would just seamlessly go into one woman's story, into another, into another, into another. And the author would leave us on such a good cliffhanger, just a very light cliffhanger at the end of each section, that it keeps you invested and it makes you excited to pick up her story once her section rolls around again. So this was informative and fun, even though it was talking about war. It's just a really solid nonfiction book. And then finally, I read two memoirs written by former or current booksellers. The first one was called Shelf Life by Nadia Wassef, which was written by one of the co-founders of Diwan in Cairo, Egypt, which was a bookstore that aimed to be so much more than a bookstore. And Once Upon a Tome by Oliver Darkshire, in which the author talks about first getting hired and then learning the ropes of working at a rare bookshop in London. Shelf Life is majorly inspiring, and Once Upon a Tome is downright hilarious. I deeply enjoyed both of these for very different reasons. I discussed them both and why I think they're both great reads in a review video that I made, which I will link for you below and up in the cards. So those are the books of March. All around, I have to say it was a pretty solid reading month. I have absolutely no complaints. If you have read any of the books I talked about today, or if you want to read them after hearing me talk about them, I would love to hear from you in the comment section below. All the books that I talked about today, as well as any links I may have promised you throughout the video, will be down in the description box below for your clicking convenience. If you're on a mobile device, just tap the title of this video and that box will open up for you. And at the bottom of that exact same description box, you'll see links to everywhere you can find me around the internets, like Goodreads, the Story Graph, Instagram, all the places where I'm the most active, in case you would like to keep up with what I am reading and writing about right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will see you in the next video. Bye.